Howdy, Rex here. Right, this video is about muzzle velocity variation. And as we've hinted at and discussed in various levels earlier, your muzzle velocity will vary considerably due to a number of different factors in the field. One of the problems that a lot of shooters experience is they have one set of ballistic data for basically one load. And that, even though that data set may include all your various air densities, your different air temperatures, different altitudes, whatever way they have it arranged, a lot of times they don't account for their muzzle velocity variations. Just because you verified your velocity when you were doing your load development doesn't mean that it's going to be that same velocity when you go out in the field under different conditions. The velocity of cartridges does change considerably. And if you plot it out on a curve, certain factors like ammunition temperature can cause your muzzle velocity to actually change by over 100 or 200 feet per second from 0 degrees Fahrenheit to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're operating in extreme conditions, it's something you definitely want to pay attention to. There's a lot of things that can cause muzzle velocity variation, and we'll go over all those in this video. And then this is where we're going to start. This is kind of the first gateway into the whole ballistics tables part of the series that we're going to get into, where we start actually showing you how to arrange this data in such a way that you can effectively come up with a good firing solution out in the field without getting too confused. Okay, so let's talk about muzzle velocity variation. One of the big things that can affect your muzzle velocity is your bore and projectile dynamics. There's a lot of different things going on there. As we've discussed earlier, bore wear, as your rifle starts to build up those micro cracks like we discussed in our mechanical erosion videos, that'll change your muzzle velocity over time. And if you plot it out on a graph, you can see that in the first early part of a barrel's life, as those micro cracks in the microstructure of the bore begin to build up, you actually experience a slight increase in muzzle velocity before it starts to drop off due to wear. So as your bore changes conditions over time due to normal bore wear, your velocities on the same exact load will vary enough to be measured. And a lot of times that it will vary enough to throw you off target. So that's something we're going to have to keep track of in the field and be prepared to adjust for. Another thing that can change our muzzle velocity in the field is obviously fouling. An increase in bore resistance to projectile movement before peak pressure builds can kind of develop within the tube. And that'll generally result in a kind of a dragging effect on the projectile, which can kind of it can usually slow down the projectile, but there's a whole number of factors that come into play. Sometimes it can increase the velocity of the projectile based on how the pressure curve works out. So fouling will change your muzzle velocity. The state of coppering that you have in your barrel, we discussed that earlier, that will change your velocity as well. You know, slight coppering resulting from firing just a couple of rounds, that can increase muzzle velocity. You can get erratic muzzle velocities like we discussed earlier in an earlier video if you have very heavy coppering, because the copper levels will change radically at a certain point in the coppering curve like we discussed earlier. Bore temperature actually has kind of a big effect on muzzle velocity variation. This was originally observed in field artillery practices. Most of this information I'm giving you comes from field artillery applications. And for normal rifle shooting, this isn't something you'd want to concern yourself with, but for our shooting discipline, shooting extreme range, things like this do make quite a difference. And so that's why we're doing the crossover from artillery to long-range precision rifle shooting. Bore temperature is a big one you want to keep track of. You got variations in bore resistance can be caused by temperature differences between the inner and outer surfaces of the barrel. So that can affect your muzzle velocity as well. Another thing we're going to have to deal with in the field. Projectile temperature also comes into play there, obviously, and there's a lot of other interesting factors that have been observed in field artillery, like barrel memory. If you want to read about that, you can look in the 6-40, I believe it's called, the Artillery Field Manual, and that'll give you some insight into some of the other phenomena that occur with muzzle velocity variation. And in some cases, it seems like the barrel actually remembers the last velocity of the last load fire, and if you change loads, it'll respond differently on that first round fired. So it's interesting things happen, but you can read about that more in the 6-40. Also, rifle manufacturing tolerances will affect muzzle velocity as well. Your headspace might change. Bolt lockup, how that locks up can change your velocity. Chamber size. So if you have any of this kind of stuff done to the rifle, you're going to have variations in velocity. So why this is applicable to us is we're going to spend a lot of time developing ballistics tables. A lot of guys put a lot into that and getting them perfected and verifying all your different loads and where they're hitting. So you're going to want to be prepared to deal with changes in velocity if they should occur. If you have to, God forbid, take your weapon into the armorer or the gunsmith and have them do some work on it, and you might have slightly different chamber dimensions, slightly different headspace characteristics, that could change your muzzle velocity, and you don't want that to cripple you. You want to be able to have the flexibility to just kind of roll with the punches with velocity, because as we're demonstrating in this video, your muzzle velocity will vary considerably due to a number of factors. Ammunition inconsistencies, we did spend a little bit of time talking about that. All that stuff we talked about in the reloading videos, that will affect your muzzle velocity as well. And for guys who are using factory ammunition, this becomes very applicable in case loads do change coming out of the factory. If you're using federal gold medal ammo, for example, and all of a sudden the specs change a little bit, and you will get muzzle velocity variations due to different batches in ammo, and you don't want that to cripple you. You don't want to have your one set of charts made up, and then what do you have to start over from scratch? Well, the way we're going to do it, you're not going to have to start over from scratch because we're anticipating our muzzle velocity variations before we even get started. So all those component issues, all the stuff we talked about in reloading, that causes major variations. One of the big ones that we haven't discussed in detail yet that's very important and has a huge effect on muzzle velocity is ammunition temperature. And it's something I've hinted at in a lot of videos, but basically, the propellant burn rate changes with temperature. And the nature of a propellant, your gunpowder charge, is that any low order explosive like gunpowder or propellants, they burn. They don't really explode. They kind of burn. Okay, so they burn very fast. And any combustible material really will actually burn more rapidly if the propellant is heated before ignition. It has to do with the ignition temperature. So stuff won't combust until it reaches a certain temperature, and if you study chemistry, you're aware of that. But so a hot gunpowder charge that's a higher temperature than a cold one will have a higher burn rate, and that will affect your muzzle velocity. So ammunition that's laying on the dashboard of your pickup truck, and you run outside and you think that the temperature that you should adjust for is like, let's say it's 50 degrees outside, and your ammo's been hot from laying in the sun, that'll drastically affect your muzzle velocity. And I'll show you by how much here in a little bit when we actually start making your charts for this, okay? We'll show you the burn rate curve and how much that affects for most powder loads. So one thing you're going to want to keep a close track of in the field is your ammunition temperature. You're going to want to keep that under control. You're going to want to know exactly what temperature your ammo is before you fire it. That's why we carry infrared thermometers in the field, or you can use other devices. You can use mechanical thermometers if you have them situated properly. But an infrared thermometer is probably the best way to go. You can use the feel method too if you've got a real good feel for it. Some guys are pretty good. I kind of need the thermometer reading sometimes because if ammunition's sitting in the sun, it can be a lot hotter than it seems like it is. So that's why we use, before we load a cartridge in the chamber, we want to know what temperature it is. And we also want to know the chamber temperature because that will also affect immediately when a cartridge is chambered. It's going to affect your muzzle velocity. So that's something we're going to have to keep track of. Sunlight, chamber temperatures, all those things are going to be very important. So how do we deal with these ammunition temperature difference issues? Well, first of all, we're going to set you up with the ammo burn rate conversion chart. I actually have one on Microsoft Excel, and we'll get into that in a separate video, the one immediately after this. I'll actually walk you through how to use that Excel sheet. And but ammo storage is going to be a biggie here. So first of all, you're going to have to keep track of all your ammo temperature changes, and you're going to have to be able to anticipate how much of a temperature change is going to translate to a muzzle velocity change. So 10 degrees is going to, how many feet per second is that? We'll show you how to figure that out in just a minute here. We'll get you situated with the charts. But ammo storage is something that you're going to have to pay close attention to. The temperature of cartridges in sealed containers generally remains somewhat insulated, kind of from the outside air temperature. So when you're in the field, you're going to want to make sure that your ammunition is the same, as close to the same temperature as the ambient air temperature as you can. And what I mean by that is, for example, we just discussed the ammunition laying on the dashboard. That's something you don't want to have happen. So, for example, if you're deer hunting and you're carrying the rifle in the vehicle, you're going to want to possibly keep that in the trunk. You don't want to keep it super heated if you anticipate using it. If it's real cold outside, you're going to want to keep that ammunition stored in such a way that it's not going to have a huge temperature shock when you get out of the vehicle, or vice versa. If it's too hot or too cold, or if it's air conditioned or whatever, you're going to want your ammo temperature to kind of match the normal conditions, so that if you have to make a shot immediately after dismounting, it's not going to be as hard to keep track of, because you're going to have to basically account for that exact temperature. And if the ammo is real hot and it's real cold outside and you have to jump out and make a quick shot, that's going to, well, it's constantly changing. So, for example, when I'm deploying my rifle, or when I dismount from a vehicle, I usually have my ammunition stored with the rifle, and I usually have it in the back of the truck in the drag bag. And as soon as I'm deployed, the first thing I'll do when we get at the FFP is I'll open up the ammo box and I'll kind of let it adjust to air temperature as fast as I can. And I'll also, if it's a hot day, you're not going to want to store your ammunition directly in the sunlight. If it's real hot out, you're going to want to keep it in shade. And whatever shade you have available, if you have to set up some kind of shade, rucksack, maybe you can keep it under a blind, or whatever you use in there. Whatever shade is available, take advantage of that on hot days. Cold days, it's a little easier to deal with, but things like that, you're going to want to pay attention to your ammo temperature. You're going to want it to be predictable. When you measure it, it's not going to be rapidly changing. And basically, all these precautions that we're talking about here, they're going to allow the propellant and the projectile temperatures to approach the air temperature at a uniform rate throughout your firing unit. And that's going to be very important for keeping track of things. Also, ammunition should be probably fired in the order in that it's unpacked in. So if you take out a box of rifle shells and you got them unpacked first, you're going to want to those are going to be adjusted to the temperature better than a brand new one you just bring out of a hot vehicle or whatever, or that hasn't been sitting in the sun as long. So you're going to want to keep your ammo as consistent as possible. You're going to want to give it time to adjust to the air conditions. And of course, obviously, your copper jacket on your bullet, that's going to have different lubricity changes with hot and cold temperatures. And the plasticity of the lead is going to vary with temperature as well. So all those things translate to muzzle velocity variation due to ammunition temperature. And that's something that's going to be hard to deal with. So how do we deal with this? And how are we going to set up our ballistics tables? So there's a lot of different ways that operators have dealt with this over time. There's two methods I'm going to really show you. Well, really three. Some of you guys are planning on using ballistic software, and that's cool. Ballistic software does an excellent job with these things. However, there is one thing that a lot of the ballistics software is not prepared to account for or keep track of, and that's your muzzle velocity variation. A lot of them, like the Kestrel Horus ballistic computer that's built into the same machine as the anemometer, you know what I'm talking about? I use one of those once in a while. It does have a feature where you can adjust your velocity for each shot. However, you're going to have to anticipate what that velocity will be. So that machine is not prepared to make that decision for you. That's something you're going to have to log in the field. So in an earlier video, I was talking about when you start doing your load development. This is something you're going to want to do after your load development is done, after you have a load picked out, and after you've established basic copper equilibrium and your bore conditions have kind of leveled off. After your break-in is complete, you're going to want to start keeping muzzle velocity logs. And a muzzle velocity log is basically, you're going to set up your chronograph, usually about 10 feet in front of the muzzle so that it doesn't explode when you shoot from the blast. And you're going to log all your different muzzle velocities for each given ammo temperature. So before you load a cartridge in the chamber, you want to get an ammo temperature reading and an ambient air temperature reading. The more information you have, the better off it's going to be, because there's a lot of weird things that happen in the field. And the better you keep track of this scientifically, the less you're going to have to scramble when it comes time to solve the problems. So you're going to get out a little notebook that you're going to keep in your kit. This is part of your normal rifle kit here, is an ammo log. Okay? And just a little notebook, and in that log you're going to have a column for ammo temperature, and in another column you're going to have bore conditions, and in that column you're going to say, is it a brand new bore that's like a virgin bore? You know, it's not like it's broken but it's still new, because remember, muzzle velocity will change as it breaks in over time, or as it starts to increase with wear. Okay? And then another column is going to be your ammunition temperature. That's kind of the big one. That's the one you for sure want to understand, because that's going to vary your velocity a lot. And you will see some deviation within the different temperature trends. Those deviations are due to the other smaller factors like I just discussed before the ammo temperature, like your bore conditions and things like that. It's going to be a smaller difference. But generally speaking, your ammunition temperature is going to be big. That's going to, like I said before, 100-degree difference is going to translate sometimes to 200 feet per second difference in velocity. So that's something you're going to have to be prepared to know. I got a lightning storm out here. But so what we're going to have is we're going to have a set of ballistics tables. So the way we're going to have our charge set up is we're going to have a few different sets of ballistic tables. Okay? They're going to be arranged in columns and rows. Your rows are going to have your different ranges denoted there. You can either have 100-meter increments or 10-meter increments. I'd recommend multiples of 100 for interpolation purposes that I'll explain later. So you can either do 100 if you want to have a short little card that you're going to put on the buttstock of your rifle. I'd recommend doing it in 100-meter increments. If you want to have a full-size chart that has all your interpolation done ahead of time, or all your little, your range increments, like in smaller units, then 10 meters is a good way to go there, 10-meter increments. And so you're going to have your different ranges in your different rows. Your columns are going to be arranged by muzzle velocity, okay? And these muzzle velocities are going to be basically connected to different ammunition temperatures. So you will have the muzzle velocity and the temperature there. And muzzle velocity at the temperature for 20 degrees, 30 degrees, 40. I usually arrange it because I'm in kind of extreme weather conditions up here. It varies a lot. In the winter, it can get well below 0 degrees. And in the summer, it can get well above 100 degrees where I'm at. So I need to be prepared for all those different temperatures. But the way I have my chart set up is actually from 0 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So I have 10 columns, one for each of those. And in those columns, I'll have the drop data calculated for each of those different temperatures. And each of those different temperatures will not only have the muzzle velocity variation correction, so you do all your ballistic computation based on that muzzle velocity for that temperature, but I will also adjust that temperature, or I will also adjust that column to suit the suitable ambient air temperature as well. So for example, a 50-degree column will not only have that column adjusted for 50 degrees muzzle velocity that ammunition temperature would create, it will also have, it will assume, because the way we're going to have our ammunition discipline for our ammunition temperature discipline is you're going to keep it at the same temperature as the ambient air temperature if you can. That's why we talked about it just a minute earlier. So for that 50-degree temperature, it's also assuming 50 degrees ambient air temperature. And that's probably the lightning quick way of setting up these ballistic tables to where you don't have to do a lot of computation in the field under pressure. So if you want a chart that's easy to read in the field with the least amount of computations, that's the chart that I'm going to show you how to create here. And that's definitely going to require, obviously, knowing your muzzle velocity trends for these different temperature ranges. Okay, so I have an example here of one of my ballistics tables. This is kind of my primary one for this particular air density for the altitude I'm at. And each one of these, you're going to have one of these chart deals set up for each different air density zone that you're going to be operating in. So for example, this one is basically set up for 2,000 feet. My standard climatic conditions here for as far as air density is concerned. And then the subcolumns are broken up into the different temperature ranges, like we just said, including ambient air temperature and muzzle velocity both incorporated into each column. So that's kind of how these charts will be set up. This is our most field expedient chart that I'm going to help you guys set up. This is the easiest to use, and I think you'll find that that's a very streamlined way that can get you very, very close, a heck of a lot closer than most other systems can get you. Actually, these charts will keep up with most of my ballistic software. Sometimes the firing solutions aren't more than, even at 1,000 meters, maybe 1 inch apart. So that's pretty dang close. Depends on, attention to detail and how well you keep your ammo log and how well you pay attention to everything. And when you're putting the ballistics tables together, your quality control and how close you watch things is going to make a huge difference. The other way we're going to do this is I'm going to take you step by step through making your own calc forms. And what a calc form is basically doing the math for each particular firing solution. It's going to require a lot more in the field calculations. You're going to have to use ballistic constants for each one of your different factors that could vary. For example, your barometric pressure, you're going to have a constant there. You're going to have constants for ambient air temperature, ammo temperature, all those things. That can be very, very precise way of coming up with a firing solution, especially if you need to custom tailor a firing solution for an extremely long distance. I tend to use the calc forms in those instances. Or if you have very unique conditions in which you might take advantage of your ammo temperature burn curve, and you might want to get a little more distance out of a particular cartridge, you can actually warm up those cartridges if it's a cold day and you need a little more speed out of the cartridge because you're not quite to your maximum supersonic range. There's an animal on the table here. I'm sorry. But if you're not quite to your range, if you can't quite reach your target from where you're at, you can speed up the ammo a little bit by basically warming up around slightly. You don't want to heat it up on a stove, obviously, but you can heat it up to 100 degrees, and that'll increase your muzzle velocity slightly enough to get maybe a couple hundred more meters out of your maximum range. So there's things you can do that way. When you start deviating from what these field expedient ballistics tables can do, when you deviate from that, you're going to have to do a custom calc form. Like if your muzzle velocity, temperature, and your ambient air temperature are completely different, then you'd have to do that, or if you have some unique circumstances. So I'll show you how to get the calc form set up as well. It's going to be a lot more complicated, but I'll make it a point to at least give you an example of how to go about that. I won't be able to walk you through every little detailed step, and it'll be hard for me to even answer questions on that because it's so involved mathematically. I would only recommend undertaking that project, doing the full bore calc form when we get into it, if you're really, really mathematically inclined or you enjoy applied physics a lot. In that case, you should be able to figure it out. I'll give you everything you need to know to get started, but I won't be able to kind of coach you through every little tiny detailed question that might arise when it comes to the calc form, but I'll get you set up with that. And you're also going to need to keep track of your muzzle velocity variation and be aware of your ammo temperature curve for your ballistic software like we discussed earlier. So I'll get you set up in how to apply this information to all three different ways, because there's a variety of you guys out there. Some of you might, there's different strokes for different folks or whatever they say, right? So next we're going to get you into the actual ammo temperature muzzle velocity curve. And here I have one printed off. It might be better just for me to show you the deal there digitally. But what we have here is just your ammo temperature curve, all you have to do is go into this Excel spreadsheet that I'm going to create for you. If you don't have Excel on Microsoft, you might either have to get a copy of that or go find someone or a computer that does have Microsoft Excel. It's just like it's a real common, super basic program. Like most students or most businesses will have it. And if you have a computer that's set up for Microsoft Excel, it'll understand this document. And all you have to do, and I'll give you the exact instructions, is you go into the appropriate column and you type in your measured muzzle velocity for the given temperature, or and our standard temperature will be 70 degrees, and I'll show you how to adjust for that if it ain't 70 degrees. And that'll plot out an approximate ammo temperature muzzle velocity curve, because these curves are all very similarly shaped, surprisingly. There is slight differences between different cartridge shapes and different cartridge dynamics that get in there. So your curve is going to be slightly different, but I mean it's very, very similar. Like even I was looking at the difference between my 243 and my 338 Lapua Magnum. One shooting a 105 grain bullet with a completely different powder, the other one shooting a 300 grain bullet. And I don't know if you can see it there, but if you superimpose these on each other in a light, they're like an identically shaped curve. They just cross the axis in a different spot. So these curves, and from all the testing I've done, the information that's in the data came from a book which I'll post here in the description. It's done by Dean Michaelis, and he's a hard target interdiction instructor, I believe, and he did a book called the 50 Caliber Ultimate Sniper Course or something like that. But I'll show you how to get set up with that as well. So one final little treat here for you before we get started on our doing our first phase of the ballistics tables is I'm going to show you a clip which I did release earlier. This is a shoot that I had with one of my buddies out here and another long-range guy. And you can watch and observe what's going on. I'll explain before you watch it what's going on. Basically, we laid down and we had heated up our barrels. It was a nice day, about 70 degrees, but the sun had started to heat up the ammo, and he was shooting a 7mm Magnum, I was shooting a 243 Winchester. And he was able to anticipate that if he would have chambered his cartridge immediately before the shot, he would save himself from having to adjust for the radically increased ammo temperature due to the hot chamber. And you'll see a lot of experienced shooters who are really know what they're doing, who are aware of that. And sometimes what they'll do is they'll open up the bolt of the rifle and they won't chamber that round until they're ready to go, because they understand that in a hot barrel that's already been warmed up from a long firing order, that they can slam that round in there. And the longer they wait, that round's going to heat up to match that barrel temperature, in which case you start to climb up a little bit. And my 243 wasn't heating up near as fast as his, but you can also see in the video too, if you watch, it's posted here, I think it's called 243 versus 7mm, but I start to shoot high after the first two rounds, and that's exactly what happened, is ammo temperature climbed up, so I had it adjusted, and this is only at 600 meters. I had the weapon adjusted for, I think it was 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and then after my barrel started heating up after just those two rounds, I put one in the chamber, take a couple seconds to breathe for the shot, and that was enough to ramp up that temperature a little bit, and it was a pretty small target, so it just missed over the top edge. So it is definitely something you do want to correct for. And if you can this is the big stumbling block that screws a lot of guys up. There's a lot of guys, you can watch this in there's a lot of other long-range shooting videos, or very accomplished shooters are out there, and even if you go to some of the long-range classes, I would assume you'd see this. I've never been to one of the civilian classes before, but like a front sight, or I forget these other names of these classes, but a lot of these guys, very accomplished shooters having a heck of a time out there sometimes, shooting over the tops of targets after a while, and they're dialing the scope, trying to adjust for something, and they can't figure out what it is. It's usually ammunition temperature has changed on them, and that's completely change our muzzle velocity. So, very, very important stuff to know. So let's get you set up with these tables here, huh? I'll walk you through it, and hopefully one of you guys, I forget who it was that was helping me post this stuff, because I'm not like Mr. Computer Guy. Believe it or not, one of you guys can send me an email, and I'll email this Excel sheet to you, and then I'll post the link to that in this video as well as in the next one. And then you can all have access to it, so you don't have to make your own if that sounds like kind of a nightmare for you. So whoever it is that's posting these data sheets and stuff for me, just send me an email and I'll give it to you. And if you post it for me, that'd be awesome. All right, catch you in a sec.
$66. Yeah. Ready? Green light. Dead center. Hit. Good shot. Send one more. Now you're gonna have to time it for the swing in there.
Yeah.
Alright, send it now. Nice. Good square hit, man.
Yeah, I aimed bottom right. Might come down another click. So we're getting a little bit of a left, a little bit of wind coming this way.
Okay, range was 590. Index at 12. Holding off about 9 inches left.
Green light. Yeah, drilled it.
I'll do one more.
Looked like it was a little bit high. Right
high?
about the bolt holes.
Where's that? On site.
Green light. That was almost dead center.
Cool. Ah. We'll find out how good this left earplug works here, huh?
Yeah, I'm gonna blow you out here.
Yeah, it could be fun. I'll send the first one, you follow up after me, okay?
Great.
You ready?
Ready. Green light.
Your turn.
Your turn.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just like to hear the noise.
I got the same as you, pretty much. Okay.
Wow, is that nice out?
Man, perfect, huh?
Yeah, let's watch the bullet trace here. I'm ready. Green light.
Alright, I'm holding 4 inches off the left.
Okay. Yeah. Like dead center.
Going to re-engage.
Green light. Okay. Time it, right?
Okay.
Green light.
Oh, I pulled it like a turkey.
Yeah.
You psyched me out, man. Okay.
Green light.
Calm down, Matt. Calm down.
Something's going on with the wind through that valley.
Did it go higher?
It went higher, but
I thought it would.
Shooting a little bit right.
You know what happened? My ammo got hot sitting in there.
Chamber.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool, man.